The Second Matabele War, also known as the Matabeleland Rebellion or Umvukela, in Isabella, was fought between 1896 and 1897 in the area then known as Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. It pitted the British South Africa Company against the Ndebele people, which led to conflict with the Shona people in the rest of Rhodesia, who would only join the rebellion in June 1896. According to the Ndebele, the Zimbabwe government has tried to misappropriate this history after Zimbabwe's independence by trying to rename it the First Chimurenga. In fact, the word Chimurenga is a word applied by the Zimbabwe government retrospectively to facts that do not bear it out either in name or numbering. The first anti-colonial war is the First Matabele War of 1893 to 1894, called in Isabella, Imfazwa. So even misappropriating Umvukela as of Chimurenga, it would not be the first but the second. Both Imfazwa and Umvukela wars are known internationally as the two Matabele Wars. There is no reference to Chimurenga in those historical accounts, and both wars pitted Ndebele warriors against BSAC forces and Shona people conscripted into the BSAC force. In March 1896, the Ndebele revolted against the authority of the British South Africa Company in what is now celebrated in Zimbabwe as the First Chimurenga. The Mlimo, the Ndebele spiritual leader, is credited with fomenting much of the anger that led to this confrontation. He convinced the Ndebele and the Shona that the settlers were responsible for the drought, locust plagues and the cattle disease rinderpest ravaging the country at the time. The Mlimo's call to battle was well timed. Only a few months earlier, the British South Africa Company's Administrator General for Matabeleland, Leander Starr Jameson, had sent most of his troops and armaments to fight the Transvaal Republic in the ill-fated Jameson Raid. This left the country nearly defenseless. The British immediately sent troops to suppress the Ndebele and the Shona, but it cost the lives of many on both sides. Months passed before the amount of British forces were adequate to break the sieges and defend the major settlements, and war raged on until October of the following year. The war in Matabeleland Rebellion. The Mlimo planned to wait until the night of the 29th of March, the first full moon, to take Bulawayo by surprise immediately after a ceremony called the Big Dance. He promised, through his priests, that if the Ndebele went to war, the bullets of the settlers would change to water and their cannon shells would become eggs. His plan was to kill all of the settlers in Bulawayo first, but not to destroy the town itself, as it would serve again as the royal kraal for the newly reincarnated King Lobengula. The Mlimo decreed that the settlers should be attacked and driven from the country through the Mangwa Pass on the western edge of the Matobo Hills, which was to be left open and unguarded for this reason. Once the settlers were purged from Bulawayo, the Ndebele and Shona warriors would head out into the countryside and continue the slaughter until all the settlers were either killed or had fled. However, several young Ndebele were overly anxious to go to war, and the rebellion started prematurely. On the 20th of March, Ndebele rebels shot and stabbed a native policeman. Over the next few days, other outlying settlers and prospectors were killed. Frederick Ellis, the famous big game hunter, had heard rumors of settlers in the countryside being killed, but he thought it was a localized problem. When news of the policeman's murder reached Ellis on the 23rd of March, he knew the Ndebele had started a massive uprising. Nearly 2,000 Ndebele warriors began the rebellion in earnest on the 24th of March. Many, although not all, of the young native police quickly deserted and joined the rebels. The Ndebele headed into the countryside armed with a variety of weapons, including Martini Henry rifles, Winchester repeaters, Lee Metfords, assegais, knockeries and battle axes. As news of the massive rebellion spread, the Shona joined in the fighting, and the settlers headed towards Bulawayo. Within a week, 141 settlers were slain in Matabeleland, another 103 killed in Mashonaland, and hundreds of homes, ranches and mines were burned. siege of Bulawayo with few troops to support them. The settlers quickly built a laager of sandbagged wagons in the center of Bulawayo on their own. Barbed wire was added to Bulawayo's defenses. Oil-soaked faggots were arranged in strategic locations in case of attack at night. Blasting gelatin was secreted in outlying buildings that were beyond the defense perimeter, to be exploded in the event the enemy occupied them. Smashed glass bottles were spread around the front of the wagons. Except for hunting rifles, there were few weapons to be found in Bulawayo. Fortunately for settlers, there were a few working artillery pieces and a small assortment of machine guns. Rather than wait passively, the settlers immediately mounted patrols, called the Bulawayo Field Force. Under such figures as Selous and Frederick Russell Burnham, these rode out to rescue any surviving settlers in the countryside and went on attack against the Indabella. Selous raised a mounted troop of 40 men to scout southward into the Matabele Hills. Maurice Gifford, along with 40 men, rode east along the Inisa River. Whenever settlers were found, they were quickly loaded into their wagons and closely guarded on their way to Bulawayo. Within the first week of fighting, 20 men of the Bulawayo Field Force were killed and another 50 were wounded. In the First Matabele War, the Indabella had experienced the effectiveness of the settlers' Maxim guns, so they never mounted a significant attack against Bulawayo even though over 10,000 Indabella warriors could be seen near the town. Conditions inside Bulawayo, however, quickly became unbearable. During the day, settlers could go to homes and buildings within the town, but at night they were forced to seek shelter in the much smaller laager. Nearly 1,000 women and children were crowded into the city, and false alarms of attacks were common. Although they kept up their siege, the Indabella made one critical error. They neglected to cut the telegraph lines connecting Bulawayo to Mafeking. This gave both the relief forces and the besieged Bulawayo Field Force far more information than they would otherwise have had. Several relief columns were organized to break the siege, but the long trek through hostile countryside took several months. Late in May, the first two relief columns appeared near Bulawayo on almost the same day but from opposite directions, Cecil Rhodes and Carl Beale arriving from Salisbury and Fort Victoria in Mashonaland 300 miles to the north, and Lord Grey and Carl Plumer from Kimberley and Mafeking, 600 miles to the south. The southern relief forces were nearly ambushed on their approach to Bulawayo, but Selous discovered the whereabouts of the Matabele, and the Maxim guns of the relief forces drove back the attackers. Not long after relief forces began arriving in Bulawayo, Gen. Carrington arrived to take overall command along with his chief of staff, Colonel Baden-Powell. With the siege broken, an estimated 50,000 Matabele retreated into their stronghold of the Matabele Hills near Bulawayo. This region became the scene of the fiercest fighting between the settler patrols and the Matabele. By June, the Shona kept their promise and joined the fighting on the side of the Indabella. But lacking a clear leader similar to Mlimo, the Shonis mostly stayed behind their fortifications and conducted few raids. Assassination of Mlimo. Military intelligence at the time thought that capturing the Mlimo would be the speediest way to end the war. The location of the Mlimo's cave had been disclosed to the native commissioner at Mangwa, Bonner Armstrong, by an unnamed Zulu informant. Armstrong immediately brought this information to the Chief of Scouts, Burnham, and the two men presented it to the Administrator of Southern Rhodesia, Earl Grey. The Administrator instructed them to present this information to the military commander, General Carrington, who called in his Chief of Staff, Baden-Powell. Carrington instructed Burnham, Armstrong, and Baden-Powell to leave that very night to capture the Mlimo if you can. Kill him if you must. Do not let him escape. Intervening news of enemy movements near Bumbazi forced Baden-Powell to go there instead. So Burnham and Armstrong proceeded on their own to the Matapos. Burnham and Armstrong traveled by night through the Matabele Hills and approached the sacred cave. Not far from the cave was a village of about 100 huts filled with many warriors. The two scouts tethered their horses to a thicket and crawled on their bellies, screening their slow and cautious movements with branches held before them. Once inside the cave, they waited until Emlimo entered. Once Emlimo started his dance of immunity, Burnham shot him just below the heart, killing him. The two men then leapt over the dead Emlimo and ran down a trail towards their horses. Hundreds of warriors, encamped nearby, picked up their arms and started in pursuit. Burnham set fire to the village as a distraction. The two men hurried back to Bulawayo, with warriors in pursuit after the assassination. Overseas press hailed Burnham and Armstrong as heroes of the British Empire, but in Rhodesia, sections of the press were skeptical about the assassination of the Emlimo. It had been a mistake on the part of British military intelligence to think of the Emlimo and the High Priest, or Prophet, in the Matapos as one in the same. Based on British Army reports, Carrington believed that the Emlimo was a central authority and that his orders fly about from one end of the country to another with great rapidity. Historian Terence Ranger writes that Carrington was almost certainly overestimating the centralization, and that Baden-Powell and other reporters tended to run the various shrines in the Matapos into one. Frederick Selous believed that the head priest of the Emlimo lived in the Matapos, but that there are other priests, or so-called Umlimos, in other parts of the country through whom they believe that the commands of the Almighty can be conveyed to them. Burnham had carried out his instructions from Carrington and, like Carrington, he relied heavily on Armstrong and military intelligence for his information. Armstrong, the instigator and active participant in the operation, was an authority on the native, his language, customs and mentality. According to fellow Native Commissioner E.C. Harley, Armstrong was also a major in the Mangwa Field Force, and Selous describes him as young, but shown incapable. Selous and Harley say that Armstrong was in command at the Mangwa Lager, although Baden-Powell and other sources name Van Rooyen and Lee as the commanders. Some writers also describe Armstrong as young and moody and claim that he too expressed doubts about the identity of the man killed, but only after the assassination. Initially the company declined to review the matter and Burnham left Rhodesia on the 11th of July 1896, a week after the Bulawayo Field Force disbanded, to join the Klondike Gold Rush. However, at Armstrong's insistence, a court of inquiry was later appointed to investigate the assassination. Although several writers have commented on the outcome, the official report itself has been lost. Referring to the court's report, Harley writes, "The finding of the judge was that the native killed was the chief priest of the Maimo. Whether there was another occult personage associated with the Maimo deception is problematical, for with the death of the chief priest, the Maimo deception also died," but historian Hugh Marshall Hole writes, "On their return they were greatly applauded for having achieved their dangerous errand, but some time later, when it was found that Emlimo was still at work, an official inquiry was held, with the result that the whole affair was exposed as an elaborate hoax." In contrast to Hole, historians Mary and Richard Bradford, Mary Clark, Peter Emerson, and Jack Lott all agree with Harley that the court of inquiry favored Armstrong. Emerson cites an 1899 report from Chief Native Commissioner H.J. Taylor as evidence that Watermeyer ruled in favor of Armstrong. Mary and Richard Bradford studied Taylor's 1899 report, and Hole's correspondence, and they suggest specific errors made by Hull in his interpretation of Taylor's report. Clark and Lott both point out that Armstrong was given a gold watch and a letter of appreciation from the board of the British South Africa Company, after the verdict was rendered. As to the identity of the man assassinated and his role, there is much confusion. In June 1896, Father Prestige, Captain Van Rooyen, Harnsley, and Armstrong met at Mangwa with several hundred natives assembled to hear the statement made by witnesses that Gotani, the man shot by Burnham, was the Marimo of the Matabele. Harley states that, at inquiry, Father Prestige, from his knowledge of the Umlimo and the power he exercised, was able to supply authoritative information which greatly assisted the inquiry. But Chief Native Commissioner Taylor's 1899 report, written 3 years after the event and after Armstrong resigned from the company over unrelated grievances, says that Armstrong by threats and bribes caused certain natives to perjure themselves and to swear to what was not true. Taylor includes in his reported affidavit by one Jonas, head messenger at the ANC's office at Mangwa, who says, "I swore on oath that Jobane was the Maimo. I knew I was lying at the time. I have never received any cattle from Mr. Armstrong, but he paid me the 5 shillings. Taylor also states in his report that Jobane, the supposed Mlimo, assassinated. However, he does not make it clear if Jobane and Jobane are different spellings for the same person. Over the years, historians have postulated several more names for the man assassinated and his role. In 1966, Ranger hypothesized that the man assassinated was not from the Matapos at all, but rather a loyal priest of the Kalanga tribe from the southwest of Matabeleland, and Ranger quotes an 1879 report from a missionary, Joseph Cochran, that states that the priest from the southwest was named Umkombo. But in 1967, Ranger states that Jobani had been the high priest in the southwest and that they obtained from the engineers of the Mangwa area affidavits that the dead man, Jobani or Habangana, had been the high priest of the Mwari and the chief instigator of the rebellion. In 1976, Lott said that Ranger relied on the American scholar Richard Werbner for his assessments, and that recent research has confirmed that Burnham killed the rainmaker of the tribe, who was Hobani or Shobani, fourth son of Banco's family. In 1994, Mary and Richard Bradford state that Burnham may have shot an innocent man, but if so, there was no premeditated plan. He was acting under orders. The Bradfords further remark, if Jobani was innocent, he was a victim not of Burnham but of white misconception of the Marimo cult and of the difficulty in distinguishing friend from foe that marks irregular warfare. While there appears to be no clear consensus about either the identity of man assassinated in the Matapos or his role, historian Howard Hensman states, with the downfall of Wedza and shooting of the Marimo in a cave in the Matapos by the American scout, Burnham, the Matabele rebellion may be said to have come to an end. Upon learning of the death of Mlimo, Cecil Rhodes boldly walked unarmed into the Indabella stronghold and persuaded the warriors to lay down their arms. With the war in Matabeleland effectively over, the Bulawayo field force disbanded on 4 July 1896. With regard to the regular forces under Carrington, Hensman writes, as the rainy season approached and peace was arranged in Matabeleland, the forces, or a considerable portion of them, were moved up into Mashonaland. War in Mashonaland. War broke out on 17 June 1896 at Mazoa with an attack by the Wata dynasty on Alice Mine. This was followed by the medium Nihanda Nyakashikana capturing and executing Mazoa native Commissioner Pollard. Other religious figures who led the rebellion included Kagavi Gumbo Shumba, who was active in the Goromonzi area, and Mukwati, a priest of the Mwari shrine who was active throughout Mashonaland. In addition to the mediums, traditional leaders played a major role in the rebellion, notably Chief Mashe Armomb, who led resistance in his chieftaincy in Mondoro, south of the colonial settlement of Salisbury. He was amongst the first chiefs to rebel and the last to be defeated. He was supplied by many of the surrounding districts, such as Chikomba. Other chiefs who played an important role included Gwabayana, Makoni, Mapondera, Mangwenda and Saki. With the war in Matabeleland ending, Gen. Carrington was able to concentrate his forces on Mashonaland and the rebels retreated into Granite Corpus. With no central command to oppose him, Carrington was able to bring Maxim guns against each stronghold in turn, until resistance ended. Nihanda Nyakashikana and Kagivigumboshumba were captured and executed in 1898, but Mukwati was never captured and died in Mutoko.